you're here, I appreciate it. Put a thumbs up in the chat. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Check one, check two. Appreciate y'all showing up. You are officially on Late Night at the Ledge. My name is Louis Conway Jr. Put a thumbs up in the chat if you are joining us. Let me know where you're joining us from. Yeah, I just want to get some basic housekeeping out the way, just so folks kind of know what this is and what this isn't. What this isn't is me giving opinions. I don't really have any political opinions, so this isn't about me sharing any. This is a very nonpartisan situation. It's really strictly a learning opportunity for folks who are trying to beat back bills, trying to pass bills in difficult geography. So if you're coming here, thinking I'm gonna talk, I'm really not gonna talk politics in an opinion type of way or in a talking head kind of way. I'm going to talk politics in a strategic way. So that means I'm not choosing sides as much as I'm choosing tactics. And again, some of y'all who know me know I ran as a socialist. I ran as a Black socialist. So I'm really not dedicated to any specific political party. But what I am dedicated to is making sure that people who are directly impacted by laws and policies are the ones who are most positioned to do the work, right? And so that means you got to be educated. That means you got to know the process. And when I first started doing this work, it often felt kind of exclusive. People were using language that was exclusive. People were using, concepts that most folks who are just starting this work really don't know what the process is, what is involved with passing a bill. And, it simply goes back to, I'm just a bill, right? That's literally how I learned the process, but it's kind of like riding a bike, right? You can ride, a simple bike or, a stationary bike, right? And not go anywhere, or you can do some mountain biking, right? And climb mountains. Well, legislative process is kind of the way. Same thing, I mean. And also, I think it's important, as some folks have heard me say, you listen to people who have been where you're trying to go and have done what you're trying to do. And so I think it's important that the reason why, I'm doing this is because I'm an advocate of making sure that people who are most directly impacted are the ones who are doing the work, right? But what often happens is we're not part of the strategy process. We're not part of the campaign building process. We're only asked to come in to testify, right? And so, in this new era of organizing, in this new era of lobbying, in this new era where post-COVID, we're not able to get as close up and personal with people. So that means two things. One, the game is open for people who or unconventional in their approaches. But also it means that, the folks who have been doing it how we've always done it, y'all gonna have to change your tactics a little bit. So what qualifies me to do this work is, back in 2019, after I ran for office, they were trying to pass a bill that would stop folks in Texas who had a felony conviction for running for office. And my wife and I put together an effort to stop this bill. And some of the tactics we used to stop this bill is what I am going to share with you. That's not my only experience, but that's the most relevant experience I think helps people understand why I'm qualified to talk how I'm talking. And if y'all can hear me, make sure, because I really can't see what's going on. So y'all got to excuse me if you're interacting with me on the chat or in Facebook, because I've got several windows open and I'm not able to see. So just, yeah, I'll see me eventually. If you really have something to ask me, text me. If not, we'll figure out a way that you guys can interact on a more interactive basis. And maybe I just need to open up my Facebook on my phone or something. Somebody tell me how to interact with people as you're going live. All right, so let's get to it. Let's get to work. Appreciate you guys showing up. In the description, you will see at the bottom a couple of links. This series of lives is sponsored by Equally Yoked Marketing, partially sponsored by Reform and the work that they're doing around parole and probation. So click that link if you are impacted by federal supervision. If you are in New York, if you're in Pennsylvania, if you're in Iowa, if you're in Mississippi, there's a survey that you guys can fill out. So if you click that survey, you can do that. And last week, someone asked me how they could support. And, I really never thought about it because I'm doing this for free. Like, nobody's paying me to do this. I'm doing this because folks need to help. So, and I thought about it. I guess one way you can help is scroll all the way down and there's a link. You can buy a t-shirt or something like that. All right, looks like, get one of these, change to wear the t-shirts or something like that. All right, let's get to it. So tonight we're going to concentrate and talk about specifically power mapping. Every piece of legislation starts as an idea, and that idea can come from a legislator, it can come from a staff member, it can come from a lobbyist, it can come from you, right? But it succeeds or fails depending on a number of factors. Now, in my opinion, you need a champion, all right? That's someone with influence, and you have to be able to influence that champion, and you have to have a map or way to get to that champion to influence them. And oftentimes it may seem like one person can affect the process. And after all, based upon, what we've seen, we're often tempted to believe that the system is corrupt, the process is corrupt, the government is broken, and politicians don't listen to the average citizen. Well, that's not true. What happens is, you get convinced that they don't listen, so you don't engage them, and they can operate on the basis of, well, no one said anything, all right? No one came to my office, no one, told me that this issue mattered, And so for me, when I ran for office, the hardest thing was to get people to believe that their vote mattered. The hardest thing for me was to convince people that just because they had a conviction, at least in Texas, they could vote. And then once I was able to convince them they could vote, I had to convince them that their vote mattered. And so why that's important is because it goes to something that I want to really spend some time on tonight, and that's influence, right? The power of influence. The whole point of power mapping is to influence your target, to either persuade them or dissuade them, right? And, as we think about that, as we think about influence, and we think about, how influence plays a role in how, we interact with each other, how we interact with society, I want you to put that same lens when we think about legislation, right? Now, why do you buy something? Right? What makes you decide to come out of your pocket and spend on something? Um, why do you watch something? My wife is a fan of Netflix, and she'll binge on some things. She'll right. And how does she hear about those shows? How does she find out, which shows to watch? Right. And so that comes down to, why do you vote a certain way? Right. So as we're walking through this, kind of think about that. Why do you buy something? Why do you watch something? It's influence. You've been influenced. Somebody told you about it, and it influenced your decision. You saw something as you were driving by, and it influenced you to turn around and buy it. Right? Someone said something that inspired you, and you voted for them. So they influenced you. And I want to talk about some of the ways we're influenced, right? Something we saw, something we heard, something we experienced, or maybe it's something someone else experienced. Those are all ways influence impacts us. And when you're thinking about power mapping, and we're thinking about our target, and we're really thinking about, passing a bill isn't just about the legislative process, getting people to vote on the bill. You got to get people excited about it. You got to be able to talk about it in a certain way, but you also have to understand how kind of the pieces move together. So, what would influence a legislator, a lawmaker? Is it something he saw or she saw? Is it something that they heard? Is it something that they experienced? Some lawmakers, as you've seen, even now with AOC and with Cori Bush, they were impacted by homelessness. They were impacted by low income wages. So they're pushing legislation that impacts based upon their lived experience. And who better to push those bills than someone that has gone through it? And that's why I'm talking to you now, is because, in this new era of organizing, in this new era of trying to lobby, you're going to have to, I'm talking to organizations, and I'm talking to, folks who rally to bring people who are directly impacted to testify. We're going to have to get folks at the table way before the testifying comes. We're going to have to bring people to the table when we begin to craft our strategies, right? So that's why I'm talking how I'm talking. That's why I'm diving kind of deep in this, right? So what's the most common source of this type of influence? As we talked about, something we saw, something we heard, something we experienced. What's the most common source of this type of influence? Well, reviews, products, restaurants, books. You can even review ads now. Google will send you, or YouTube will send you a little message, ask you to review, or after you get off a service call, they'll ask you to fill out a survey. Well, those are reviews. That's how you generate influence. And how often has a review impacted your decision to buy or not to buy? Now, my wife and I live and sometimes die on the stake of reviews. Based upon the reviews, we often will go somewhere or we won't go somewhere. We often won't buy something, we will buy something. So I want you to think about which companies specialize in reviews. Well, you got Yelp, right? And then you can always leave a 4-star somewhere or a 5-star somewhere. Some of y'all help me out and think about places where which companies specialize in reviews. And then I want you to think about who supports those companies that specialize in reviews. Well, I would venture to say that those companies who specialize in reviews are those being reviewed. Those are the ones who support companies like Yelp. Those are the ones who support, places where you can leave a review, because they understand word of mouth. They understand that if you tell somebody about their business, you're going to likely come to that business. So that's influence. Who influences us? Friends, family, staff, voters. When we're talking about lawmakers, influence comes in lots of shapes and forms. How we influence? Well, friends and family and staff members have a tremendous influence on the day-to-day decisions of us, but they also have impact on the day-to-day decisions of elected officials. Personal relationships are one of the ways that you can influence a target official. The media, messaging, what you say to people is important. Or what you say to an elected official is important. And, we'll talk about how to develop a message, but just know that, the way you talk to someone influences them. Personal interests and passions. When you go to college, you join fraternities, you join sororities, you may play golf, you may even play tennis. In my case, I like music. So one of the ways to influence me would be through music. One way to influence someone else may be through their sorority or their fraternity. Again, it's going back to relationships, but I want to kind of give you a hack. For me, what has worked is not so much targeting the official as building a relationship with staff members. It's critical to build relationships and to communicate effectively with legislative staff, because they're going to be the ones who's responsible for briefing officials about an issue and advising them on what their position should be. So what does that mean? They're going to spend time with them that you're not going to be able to spend with them. So when you go talk to an official, when you go talk to a lawmaker, they're going to nod their head yes, and they're going to check all the boxes, but they got 20 of you in line. However, if you build a relationship with the staff, you get the staff excited, you get the legislative director excited, you get the council excited, you get the person that answers the phone. When you come in that door, the person that's on the phone, you get that person excited about the bill, and I promise you, you'll pick up more traction than you will trying to set up a meeting with the official. At least that's been my experience, right? So continuing a bit more, I just want to really lean into the importance of influence and importance of building those relationships. Don't approach this process too deep in terms of, the people who approach it in this very, they've gone to school and, you got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. And depending on the surveys or the polling or, well, okay, yes and no. When we were able to pass bills or stop bills, it's because we got staff excited about the issue. And the way we got staff excited about the issue, for instance, with fair chance hiring, we talked to staff that might be directly impacted. They may have a brother or a sister who had gone through the system and were being denied employment. So they were able to connect emotionally with the issue. So whatever that issue is, you want to kind of fill out the staff, fill out the LD, fill out the general counsel, fill out again the admin person, fill them out, have conversations with them. Don't just go in there to set up a meeting with the official. Go in there and have coffee with them. Go in there and sit down with them and talk to them. I promise you, building that relationship is going to do more for your bill than trying to go in there and talk to the official. All right, so let's move on. Let's talk about once you have the target acquired, knowing what you want. when you ask for something, when you're in there talking to them, you can't be rambling. Like, you got to get to the point. You got to get to the point concisely, and you got to get to the point in a way that makes them feel it. And so, when you're asking for something specific, most often the most effective way to get the officials' attention is, again, talk to the staff, get them excited about it, do some research, find out what school they went to, find out, y'all may have gone to the same high school, y'all may have gone to the same college. I found out when I was doing my research on a target that some of his staff had gone to the same high school as my cousins had in Dallas, right? But always bring the conversation back to the policy goals and the policy objectives. Have a conversation, but always steer it back to why you're there, and make sure that you're clear when you're talking to them. If you're talking to them about bail reform, don't necessarily talk about poverty as much as you talk about the necessity of people not being held because they can't afford bail, because you're going to lose folks, right? So there's certain things that you can ask and certain things that you shouldn't ask, but we'll talk about a lot of that stuff later. And I really did this backwards. So I was supposed to show you the influence deck last, but I did it backwards. It's all good. Let's go into power mapping. All right. So power mapping, things to think about: map influence our target, grid of influence, helpfulness, determine relationship power lines, target priority relationships, build a plan. So when you think about a power map, there's usually, as you see in the middle, there's a central target. And you want to figure out a way to that target. How are we going to get to Representative Smith? And as you'll see, there's branches, and those branches break off, but there's still some main thoroughways to our target. As I said earlier, it may be a religious organization, it may be school, it may be employment, it may be a board membership, how you get to them. But I call this microwave power mapping. As I told you, I was able to influence the legislature the most through their staff without ever meeting the official. Now, it's my opinion that they, politically, it was not viable to meet with me, because at that time I was pretty radical, and I'm sure it did their public image no good to meet with me or admit that they had met with me. However, their staff loved me, right? The legislative director loved me. The general counsel loved me. The folks that were able to move the official loved me. And the same thing that can happen to you, because you're going to build relationships with the staff. Secondly, you only have so much time. So when you're in those rooms, you're going to have to gauge the temperature, and before you leave, get some type of commitment, right? Even if it means that they will agree to call you once they have talked to the official. Maybe it's even they agree to have lunch with you. Maybe they agree to follow up with you, but get some type of commitment when you make those office visits. Now, my strategy was to invest in official staff, and my tactic was to build relationships with each one. I was very intentional, deliberate about that. And you can go to any of the staff who is still there, and they'll tell you that I never spent a lot of time trying to talk to the officials. I spent time trying to talk to the staff. My theory was the staff will spend more time with them than you will ever be able to. I would do my research, and I would figure it out. Chief of staff, the legislative director, the general counsel. Once you get them informed, activated, and excited, they'll take that information back to the official. Now, you want to map around a person or an institution that's going to solve our problem. What really got me started doing this was me seeing the all-out attack on voter rights in the South and Republican-led states. And I realized that us as so-called progressives and us that are left of center, we seem to think that we're going to be able to pass bills in Republican states with Democratic sponsors. It's not going to happen. And that's unfortunate, right? But I'm just being real with you when you're talking about trying to pass a bill. You got to get your feelings out the way, and you got to get that wide-eye liberal progressive whatever it is that makes us not believe that we need Republicans to pass bills, right? So who's the key decision maker? Oftentimes when it comes to a bill, it could be the chairman of the committee. It could be the Speaker of the House. In some cases, it's the governor. And when you decide who that key decision maker is, you want to identify their peers, their interest groups, and their social networks. So, and I will provide this deck for people via a link as well. But the influence of our target, we want to make sure that these folks are not just, people who like us. We want them too, but we want our champions to have some kind of sway in their committee. They got to have some kind of sway in their district. They have to be able to be someone that can move other people, right? Take a look at the donors. Look at who is donating to your target. Those people may be moved not necessarily by the instant issue, but they may be moved by an adjacent issue that you can talk to them about. In cases of bail, they may not be interested in moving their donee on bail, but they may be interested in moving them on housing. They may be interested in moving them on access to healthcare. And so if you can figure out a way to tie those two in together, then you've got the donor on board and you got that donor putting pressure on your target. All right. So those are some of the ways that you can work adjacent to the target and still pressure the target. Again, you got to think about relationships. What kind of relationships does your target have? What kind of affiliation? Is he part of a union? Is he or she part of, what does their family do? Maybe you know someone in their family. Maybe you know someone, who knows their family, right? If you go into any room and you ask somebody if you know such and such, somebody in that room is 2 or 3 degrees away from the person that you know. You just have to do the power map exercise. And at some point, we'll do a power mapping exercise once I'm able to get interactive with y'all and see who's on and who's not. All right. But as you read through this, there are ways for us to work through different type of organizations. As I said, you can work your magic by working indirectly through these branches, if you would. You got alumni associations, you got unions, you got business organizations, you got political organizations. But again, staff of elected officials is one of the best ways. Think about allies, think about vendors, think about, people who, lobbyists are a great source too. Now, I don't want to knock lobbyists in any way. And, in some cases, it makes sense to pay a lobbyist. In some cases, the lobbyists hold relationships that you're not able to build. But I caution those folks because once the session is over and that lobbyist contract is over, they take those relationships with them. So we want to be building those relationships ourselves. We want to be able to go to that staff person. When you walk through the door, you want that person to know who you are, not necessarily because you're attached to a lobbyist, right? Now, how can you get information on your target? Well, the internet. The internet is one of the best ways to get information on on your target, go to their LinkedIn, go to their Facebook, go to, their Twitter. You can get a feel of what they're passionate about. You can get a feel of what their network is. You can get a feel of what their background is, especially now this applies for all states. All states have some sort of way for you to track legislation, but there's also a website that I use called Lege, I think. Lege, I'll drop it in the chat once I figure out what legiscan.com. Legiscan.com, Legis can.com. And any state that you're in, you can look up any bill, you can look up any session, and that'll help you track the voting history of your target. It'll help you to see what they're really excited about, what kind of bills that they have sponsored in the past, and that'll give you a hint if that's the right champion or not. And also, just be aware that the person that you're targeting, you want to also have a secondary target as well, because things whatever you think won't happen will happen, and you may lose that target, right? So once you identified your target, you can begin to lay out a map to that target, right? And again, it's family, it's organizations, it's the media. And then you want to x-axis and y-axis, and you want to list the people based upon their influence and their support of the issue. So the least amount of support, you want to go to the left. The least amount of influence, you want to go towards the bottom. So what does that look like? Well, the political organizations that he's attached to may be strong and they're opposed. So you're going to have to neutralize them. But then you've got some major donors who are not so much opposed, but they may not be influential. So you'll be able to leverage their money to have that conversation with them. And it goes with the same scale, right? And oftentimes, when it comes to public, the public doesn't always have influence, even though it may strongly oppose it, or the unions, or it could be an organization, it could be a fraternity. Just this grid helps you lay out and see who's most important, who has the most impact, and who's on your side. Now, when you map those people out, right? You see the civic organizations, you see the unions, the donors. Once you map those out and you put your target in the middle, you'll see where some of those lines interconnect. You'll see in terms of family where you may have contact with 3 members of his family, and they're connected with the mayor of Denver, but they also all go to church together. And then someone in that church is a friend of his that he went to school with. So when you're thinking about your target or targets, really, really think about how can you influence, because trust me, my wife has influence on me. If you get to my wife and you convince her of something, well, you've probably convinced me of something. And same difference. If you get to a person's, you see it in the press all the time, and if you get to someone's daughter or someone's son and you're able to influence them about this issue, they become an advocate where they're going to move their parent or their spouse or their whoever, right? So look for power nodes. Look for where there's a lot of nexus or many points of nexus, many points of connection, such as a church. Churches often hold a lot of power because that's where people, meet on different levels. It may be a spiritual level, maybe a social level, maybe a business level, but you're going to be able to make lots of connections through those power nodes. And those power nodes are the ones that are really going to deliver you the kind of influence that you need. I'm going to hurry. I know I don't want to hold you long, but I want to hold you long enough. So make a plan. Research before you move, before you do anything, research. Get a good sense of your target's relationships. Get a good sense of how that person's voting. Get a good sense of who's supporting that person. Get a good sense of where his money is coming from or their money is coming from. Make sure that you can really, really identify the points of influence. Then you take action with the rest of the strategizing process, which means, when I talk about the strategizing process, once you map out your target, then you got to figure out what you're going to do with your target. And that's what we'll talk about next week. Next week, we'll talk about what to do with the target. Once you have them in your sights, we'll talk about how to move them. We'll know what to ask, how to ask. And if you guys have any questions, make sure you drop those in the chat. This will be available for replay. You can be able to share it. I'll make sure if it's not, that I'll provide a link. I'll upload it to YouTube maybe or a website so you can go see it there. All right, Late Night at the Ledge every Wednesday night starting at 10 p.m. I will provide these slide decks for you and a separate link. If you're just eager for them right now, you can go to lewisconwayjr.com and click on the resources, and you'll get the power mapping link. The other one I'm going to have to post in the chat. All right, so appreciate you guys hanging out with me. Fight, don't give up. We're going to get smarter. We're going to fight harder. We're going to stop these bad bills. We're going to make sure that people have power. We're going to make sure that people who are most directly impacted are informed so they can be effective. All right, you guys are amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk to you later.